Adam, my friend, it's always great to talk to you. And today we're talking on the occasion of the release of your new book. It's been doing really well. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me back on the show.
It must be such a relief to have it do well. I know how much effort you put into writing your books, and people who've never written books, they don't understand that it's soul consuming.
It is, but I like to joke that I used to think the hard part was writing the book. Now I know the hard part is actually selling a book. I would take writing a book any day of the week over selling a book. If I could just, I used to think you could just put all your, as you said, your heart and soul into writing a book, and then the day that the book was finished, you don't have to think about it anymore, and it's done, and it just organically finds an audience and finds readers. But of course, that's not really the case. If you want people to actually notice your book, you have to usually do something like events, going out and doing book signings or book talks or slideshows or even going on someone's podcast, let's say. But yeah, I mean, and I think the media landscape, as we were alluding to before the show started recording, has really fragmented over the last 10 years. So it's harder to just, hope that if you get a review in a big newspaper or on some mainstream media, it will help your book find an audience. But I can't complain. My book has, as you said, has been doing very well. It's on the national bestseller list, and I'm probably the most surprised out of anyone whenever that happens. Even though it's my sixth book, I always write them sort of thinking no one's ever really going to read this. It's about an obscure explorer who vanished more than 100 years ago. This individual, Hubert Darrell is his name, he didn't even have a Wikipedia page. He, as far as I know, still doesn't have a Wikipedia page. So it's a fairly obscure topic. And if you look at the bestseller list, they tend to be dominated by celebrities. So it's always
Mhm.
something of a surprise to me that any of my books, and maybe especially the new one, finds any kind of readership, and yet lo and behold, they seem to do so.
Well, the part that you're missing here is that you're becoming somewhat of a celebrity.
Not really, though. My Instagram following is still, I think, quite a bit smaller than yours. So if I'm a celebrity, then you're a bigger celebrity, right?
Well,
Is that not fair?
I don't know. Those Instagram numbers, social media numbers are vaporware. It's easy to get caught up on those numbers, but how many of them are legacy? How many of them are from 10 years ago that people don't follow you anymore,
Well,
but
I
the
didn't
numbers
have
are there.
social media 10 years ago, so that
Yeah.
wouldn't apply in my case. But I guess you did
Yeah.
have it 10 years ago?
Yeah. I've been in this playing in this arena for a while. I think I started on YouTube back in 2006. So but back to explorers. So tell me a little bit more about Hubert Darrell.
Yeah, Hubert Darrell, I like to say, is the greatest explorer no one has ever heard of, at least until I wrote this book. Because as I alluded to, he was a man forgotten by history. His name slipped through the cracks, and he was almost totally forgotten. He'd never appeared in any previous book. No one had ever written a biography of him. As I said, he didn't even have a Wikipedia page. And yet, amazingly, 115 years ago, many of the biggest names in polar exploration would have told you that Hubert Darrell was the greatest wanderer the North had ever seen, a legend in his own time. I mean, outside of the North, he was never well known, but across the North, people from all different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, admired him. And he was a lone wolf, a solitary wanderer who was known for traveling thousands of kilometers in all kinds of conditions, alone on foot, without even a sled dog. And in his day, I mean, travel by dog sled was pretty much the universal norm in the Arctic regions, or if not that, at least by a canoe in the summer. And although Darrell did occasionally travel by dog sled or canoe, his greatest feats were all done on foot, traveling across thousands of miles of Arctic ice. I mean, he traveled even on the Northwest Passage on foot. I mean, this was widely viewed at the time among people in the North as an extraordinary feat. In fact, Amundsen, the legendary Norwegian explorer, many would say the greatest polar explorer who ever lived, the man who beat Shackleton, he beat Scott, the first person ever to reach the South Pole in Antarctica. Amundsen said in his autobiography that Darrell was the greatest of them all. I mean, he described Hubert Darrell. He said, with men like him, I could go to the moon. That's how high regard
Mhm.
Amundsen viewed Darrell. And I thought, how is that possible when I stumbled upon this? Well, turned out, Amundsen was famous. He went down in history not only by becoming the first person to reach the South Pole, but he was also the first person in history to successfully sail through the Northwest Passage. I mean, many had tried before him, but none had succeeded. But in his small Norwegian ship, Amundsen sailed into the icy labyrinth that is the Northwest Passage, and he attempted to sail right through it. It took him 3 years, but it was while his ship was trapped in the Arctic ice, frozen in on all sides, that one day he saw the figure of a man on the horizon. And I mean, it looked like a mirage, a hallucination. This can't possibly be real. But the figure got bigger and bigger. And finally, Amundsen and the other Norwegians realized this is a man traveling alone without even a husky on the Arctic ice, as if he's out for a Sunday stroll. And of course, that was Hubert Darrell, who came aboard the ship. And Amundsen was, blown away. How is this possible? What are you doing? And Darrell just casually said, I'm here to deliver the mail. He had volunteered to carry the mail over 1,000 miles from the nearest telegram station in Alaska to ships that were trapped in the ice of the Beaufort Sea. So that was Hubert Darrell in a nutshell. And then in 1910, he vanished. He disappeared in the wilderness. No one really knew what had happened. It was briefly covered in the newspapers of the day, but not extensively by any means. But because he was a lone man and legendary for his wandering, no rescue party was ever sent. It took a while before anyone even realized he was missing, and no search expedition was ever mounted. That is until 115 years later I came along and said, I'm going to pick up whatever breadcrumb trail I can find and go out there and search for any artifacts, any ruins, relics, anything at all associated with Hubert Darrell, and try to unravel the mystery of his disappearance. What really happened? Did he voluntarily turn his back on the world and decide to become a hermit, build some log cabin deep in the backwoods, or did some tragic accident overtake him? Did he fall through the ice? Did he perish of hypothermia? Or was it something darker? Could he have been murdered? I mean, this was a relatively lawless period, and as I try to explain in the book, there were unexplained murders in the Canadian Northwest at that time. Just the year after Darrell disappeared, 2 trappers were found murdered inside their log cabin on the Mackenzie River, not far from the area that was his old stomping ground. So this was all part of his mystery, but I thought, this is a fascinating, epic adventure story, and it's one that I want to put on the page and turn into a book. So that's what I tried to do.
To get, your insights and to get a little piece of the answer, they should buy your book, Vanish Beyond the Map. But what I wanted to focus on today was kind of the mindset. So do you have any clues as to what drove him to do these extraordinary long-distance solo expeditions across the ice? As you said, traveling by himself and without even the amenities of the day, things like dog sleds. That's certainly an extraordinary person. Why was he doing this stuff?
Right. So I wanted to reconstruct his entire life as far as I could. I ended up finding his baptism record. Even when he was born was something of a mystery. He was such an enigma, this individual. But I found that he was born in 1874 to a poor family in England. And when he was only 16 years old, he had to leave home. His family had a lot of mouths to feed, and there just wasn't enough to go around. So when he was 16, in those days, this is 1890, he was considered a man. He said, you have to go out on your own, make your own way in the world. And he and his brother, who was 2 years older than him, 18, the 2 teenagers, they left and they headed to about the only place poor people could get a start in life, which was the western frontier, the windswept Canadian prairie, where they settled about 300 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg on the prairie. And they established a homestead there, essentially a small log cabin. Fortunately, the area they settled had enough tree cover that they could build a log cabin. They didn't have to build a sod house. But these 2 teenagers, alone against the world, tried to farm on the northern prairie, which is, a pretty harsh place even today, but you can imagine what it was like in the 1800s. They're almost entirely isolated and cut off. Their nearest neighbor would be miles away. And they slaved away there, working as hard as they could for 7 years. I mean, they had to borrow money just to buy farm implements and grain, but as hard as they worked, they only sunk deeper into debt. The farm never made any profit, which was often the case in the Canadian prairies in the 1800s. I mean, they were struggling against bad weather, pests, all kinds of things. But after 7 years of that, you can imagine Hubert Darrell, he became inured to backbreaking labor. He also got used to wandering around in all kinds of conditions. It's an interesting irony that conditions in Manitoba are in the winter often as cold as about 1,000 kilometers north of there on the Arctic tundra. And of course, the prairie in the winter looks a lot like the Arctic tundra, especially in that day, featureless landscape of just windswept open white plain. And Darrell, I mean, he learned his trade well. He would hunt, he would trap, he would do all kinds of things to supplement his income. And of course, as I explained in the book, where he was born in England in 1874 was not the England of 2025. He lived in a rural area. Hunting was still an important pastime, you know, snaring rabbits, doing this kind of thing. We don't know much about his childhood because he came from a humble background, but all of this seems to fit with the general picture of who he was. But the catalyst that changed his life was 1897. That was the year that word came from the Klondike of the discovery of gold. And this was, you know, world-shattering news. It was the greatest gold rush in human history. And it must have felt like the answer to their prayers. A young Hubert Darrell, he said, I will go north and strike it rich, and hopefully we'll be able to pay off the farm's debts and finally get a start in life. So, like thousands of others, he went north to the Yukon. But unlike almost all those others, he stuck around. I mean, he fell in love with the wilderness, the call of the wild, the allure of the unknown, whatever you want to call it. It got deep into his soul. He was bitten by the wilderness bug. And that is really the best answer to your question. You know, what drove him? Why did he wander thousands of miles? Well, among those wild mountains and rivers, where he was nominally supposed to be panning for gold, but he doesn't really seem to have done very much actual prospecting, he discovered his true calling, which was simply that of a wanderer. And boy, did his skills ever fast become legend. He very soon after started wandering everywhere from the Bering Sea, I mean practically Russia, all across Alaska, the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, all the way over to Hudson's Bay, north into the high Arctic, south into the boreal forest. He wandered everywhere. And even though he had very little formal education, he was obviously a quick study. He became fluent in at least 2 different indigenous languages, possibly a third. All of this information, by the way, I have from his letters, because even though he was a lone wolf, he never entirely lost touch with his brother back in Manitoba, or indeed his other siblings. Whenever he got the chance, if he came upon some ship on the Arctic Ocean, he would leave a letter for the captain and say, you know, next time you're back in some port, could you please mail this for me? If he came across a isolated fur trade post, he would leave a letter. And when I got to the point where I wanted to do a journey to retrace his route and try to figure out what happened to him, I was thinking, where are those letters? And naturally enough, he disappeared in 1910, but for decades afterwards, his siblings went on living. They held on to his letters as mementos, keepsakes of their long-lost brother. And then when the last of the siblings passed away, they donated all those letters to a local archive, where they essentially sat collecting dust for another half century before I came upon them. And it was those letters that allowed me to reconstruct his life. And he had even, this is the most amazing thing of all, he'd even mailed home his journal covering the years 1899 to 1906, so 7 years of his life, and I had that as well. So I used this to get inside his thoughts, and in the book I've tried to reproduce as much as possible his own words. Let Hubert Darrell speak for himself, reproducing his journal entries and his letters, and ultimately using those to try to retrace his route, where he was heading when he vanished, and trying to figure out what really did happen to him.
You and I both really love reading the original literature. But when I was thinking about all the stuff I've read, whether it's from J.B. Terrell or Samuel Hearne, or read about the Franklin expedition, or any of these other people, Patterson up in the Nahanni and in other places in the Northwest, I was trying to think, was there a common theme that bound them together and sent them out into the wilderness? Clearly, many of them loved the wilderness. I'm not clear if Franklin loved the wilderness, but I don't think there's really a single reason other than love of wilderness that sent them out. I mean, a lot of people, they were doing this for their job. And presumably J.B. Terrell, who covered an enormous area of the North, was doing it, you know, presumably he could have done other things. He could have made his money another way as well. But it was a job for him. He was working for things like the geological survey or geological society. Yeah, he was mapping
The Geological Survey, yes. Yeah.
geological survey. Am I wrong there? Is there a single unifying reason that sent them all out into the
Well, it's
wilderness to
different.
run around?
Samuel Hearne, he would be more like Hubert Darrell in the sense that he came from a very poor family. He was sent to the Navy when he was basically a boy, as a cabin boy, and he saw action almost immediately in the 7 Years' War. And to be a child on board a warship in the age of sail, there could be few more terrifying fates. I mean, he saw people being killed by cannon fire all around him. And then once he'd served his term in the Navy, he left, but sailing was the only trade he knew, so he enlisted on a sloop in the service of the Hudson's Bay Company, and they promptly shipped him off to Hudson's Bay. So in his case, I mean, he did really come from a humble background, and he didn't really have many other options. He was stationed at, as you've been there, a very isolated fort on the coast of what is now present-day Manitoba, and he basically was half volunteered but half selected to be their explorer and send them inland because he had a knack for languages and he seemed to be able to adjust himself to the surroundings quite well. So, I mean, it is a little bit different in the sense of people like Hubert Darrell and Samuel Hearne in that they didn't have like limitless possibilities on the table and say you could go to university. Neither of them had that possibility. It's not like they could, become a lawyer or do this. They were very poor, and in their day, the only choices they had were all things that would be difficult, dangerous, back-breaking labor. So they ultimately, I think, gravitated towards the wilderness, in part because it offered freedom. And even though that freedom came at a high price, which was, full of hardship and danger, they liked it. And Samuel Hearne, I mean, as a guy who'd been in the Navy since he was a boy, the Navy, as you know, was just in that day incredibly rigid in its discipline. You could be flogged for just about anything. Even an admiral could be executed if they lost, which they did famously in the 7 Years' War, to encourage the others, as Voltaire put it. But to get out into the wilderness for someone like Samuel Hearne would be revolutionary. It'd be like, for the first time, I'm not being ordered around. Even in the Hudson's Bay Company, he would have to follow someone's orders. But in the wilderness, he was his own master, to at least a certain extent. And same with Hubert Darrell. I think ultimately that's what he fell in love with is, yes, the life was harsh. We shouldn't romanticize it. But, conditions in late 19th century farming were harsh. So to be his own master, to sleep under the stars, to travel wherever his heart led him across the wilderness, it's evident that it appealed to Hubert Darrell. And this comes across in his diaries. He could be quite poetic. He speaks about the beauty of the tundra in the fall, ablaze with fall colors, a tapestry. He wrote about all these things. So that was definitely part of it in his case. Franklin is different. Franklin came from a wealthy upper-class background. He was a commissioned officer. And in his case, there's other factors at play. He'd served in the Napoleonic Wars, but after the wars had ended, peacetime, they needed to do something with those ships, so he was simply ordered to go to the Arctic and look for the Northwest Passage. And then, obviously, I think he must have, on some level, enjoyed those early expeditions that he did, because he basically sought out a commission to go back, right? So I guess there is something.
Well, maybe I'm not sure he enjoyed half of his crew dying and resorting to cannibalism on his first expedition, but perhaps the glory was addictive, right? I mean,
it is strange. Like, yeah. He went on his first expedition. Yeah, he had like 20 men, and only 9 came back alive. But and he went down in history from that very first incident, the very first expedition, as the man who ate his boots. But he did seem somehow to have like I don't know, a strange. Like, obviously their suffering was extreme, but I don't know. There did seem to be something in it that he found appealing. Maybe it was the glory, as you said, because obviously his account became very popular in England when it was published. But I think it was Amundsen, if I remember correctly, reading
he did it for the gram.
Yeah. Well, Amundsen said, I'm pretty sure I have his autobiography right over there, but Amundsen wrote in his autobiography that he read Franklin's account of that first journey, and it immediately filled him with an overwhelming desire to become an Arctic explorer. And I was like, geez, that's not what I would get out of that account. I'd be like, I don't want to do this, right? Like, I'm going to pack a ton of granola bars if I do a journey because I don't want to be eating my boots and starving. But Amundsen, apparently that inspired him. But he's different as well because he obviously grew up in Norway among the mountains. So he was doing journeys in wilderness from a very young age. But yeah, what I was going to say, though, is I really do think there is something deep inside all of us that gravitates towards wild places, that even if it's dormant in many of us, that it speaks to us for the simple reason that for the overwhelming majority of our own history, our lives were lived in the outdoors, right? Under the stars, in the open. That's 98% of human evolutionary history. So I do think there is something on that level where it's like, yeah, there's a reason why people get stressed out with modern life, staring at digital screens and living in very dense urban communities is because, well, we were never really meant to live that way. And I think that's why millions and millions of people enjoy going into the outdoors. Even if they're not going to do an expedition, people like to be able to see the mountains just beyond Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
That's very widespread appeal, and I think there's something about that, right? And I think that's, yeah, pretty close to being a human universal.
I mean, I guess all these needs and desires are balanced differently in different people. Clearly, for you, and I think to some extent for me, the need for autonomy to be out there, like I've guided, I've gone with friends and family, and I've gone alone. And those are three different things. It's like saying Chinese food, Italian food, and I don't know, Japanese food. They serve different needs. And certainly being out there alone, I think, serves a deep need for autonomy and this weird world where everything is your fault and everything is your decision. But maybe I'm projecting. To what extent does this autonomy and the ability to wander drive you in your expeditions?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I never really get too philosophical in my books. I try to keep them action oriented and, adventure focused. I don't, I'm not like you, philosopher, the strenuous life and perseverance, but maybe a little bit. But I do love the freedom. Yes, absolutely. The autonomy and the freedom that comes with the wilderness to me is one of the most deeply appealing aspects. And that's one of the reasons why I can never really get that excited about going car camping in a national park or a provincial park where millions of people go. I mean, of course they have beautiful scenic spots, but it's so regimented that it really just feels as, I mean, you were using the example of different national foods, but it feels like a totally different sport, right? Like it just feels like a different world because everything is so regimented, right? You have to book your spot months in advance. Okay, your campsite 327, which you reserved online, looking at photos so you knew what the campsite would look like ahead of time, and it's got a picnic table and a fire pit, and you pull in there with your vehicle, and you have to sleep on the designated area, set your pad up there, and the washrooms are over here and this and that. And I'm like, this is almost 180-degree diametric opposite of what it is to be in the wilderness, which is, part of the appeal to me, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is not knowing where you're going to sleep every night. And it's almost exciting. Like, what beautiful little bay am I going to come into tonight? Some gorgeous little campsite. And, just spread out here. Oh, the tundra is so level here. This is a real luxury, right? I'm not on a slope. Or I found the most perfect boulder that's going to make a wonderful table for tonight. And it's like such a delight to find something like that. And it doesn't happen very often, but when you do, it makes that spot all the more special. Or what beautiful view. Look at that little brook, the water cascading over the rocks. And, that's part of the fun is finding a campsite because, of course, there's no designated campsite. There's no established trail. You have to figure out your own way. And that's part of the fun and the thrill of it all is, finding out, I don't know where I'm going to end up tonight, but I'm going to have this whole lake or this whole river to myself, not another soul around for miles. Last time I went to Algonquin Park, which is a very popular place, obviously, was a few years ago. And I went there on like a weekday in July, so it wasn't even Saturday or Sunday. And you have to reserve your spot. Parking lot's like overflowing, right? There's cars all the way down the road. And when I got in there and I made my site, after dark, all I hear is like rock music blaring from across the lake because there's just the whole lake is now even in the backcountry is ringed with people camped around it. So it's a very different experience, and even the ecology is different, right? The forest doesn't look like a natural forest anymore because the understory has been completely hacked out by people gathering up firewood, and all the branches have been chopped down off the trees. So even the ecology of the place has changed, and it's that's one of the things you're most conscious of when you're in a truly wild spot is the forest in the subarctic can often feel very dense and like there's black spruce branches every which way, where in a lot of heavily traveled areas all that has been cleared away, right? So yeah, it is very, very different, obviously.
Arguably, some of that density of undergrowth is worse now or thicker now than it was 100 years ago, especially around the rapids, because 100 years ago people were traveling by canoe and they had to maintain these portages on most of the medium to larger rivers. Whereas now, if people are traveling there at all, which isn't very much, the natives are often traveling by motorboat, and those portages aren't maintained. So
Right.
there's an argument that in the more remote areas, the forest actually resembles pre-human migration to North America.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the river. There are some backcountry rivers that are well traveled, obviously, like the
Hmm.
Nahani or
Sure.
something. I think you have to get reservations there. And then there's like the moderate ones that, yeah, you're saying those were definitely historic fur trade routes that would have been well traveled in the days of the Hudson's Bay Company with like regular fleets going through there. But then there's like the really remote little tiny creeks and streams that nobody would really want to go down historically because your birch bark canoe would get ripped to shreds because they barely have enough water. Those ones I imagine pretty much look the same now as they did, 200 years ago. But I mean, that's partly what makes the wilderness so exciting is there really is a huge range, a huge diversity. We have rivers in Canada that are literally miles wide, like the Mackenzie and many others as well. And then we have like raging mountain torrents to sluggish, meandering ones that have almost no perceptible current whatsoever. We have little tiny creeks. We have everything under the sun here, tens of thousands of different rivers, so that you would think there's something to suit everyone's taste. Yeah, I mean, when I did my journey where the falcon flies, which was all about canoeing from my doorstep on Lake Erie to the Arctic, it really opened my eyes and gave me a new appreciation for different types of landscape, like some of the most densely populated parts in Canada. I had to canoe by Toronto, I had to canoe through Montreal down the St. Lawrence River. And what I enjoyed about that is even though those are cities home to millions of people, I've discovered there's still a lot of green space, even around and even in the hearts of those cities. And that, kind of opened my eyes that it's not just about the most obscure, remote river you can get to. It's also about finding beauty in unlikely spots, at least if you're a guy like me who loves the wilderness. I was amazed at the islands around Montreal, some of which are bird sanctuaries, so they've never been developed, and they're just densely forested little islands. That was really nice to see. Where you look the other way out your canoe and you're looking at high rises. Or even in Toronto, I was astonished that they have the Toronto Islands, a chain of 13 islands just offshore. Four of those islands, if I remember correctly, are uninhabited wild little islands that don't even have bridges going out to them. They're just dense forest. I ended up camping on one of them because I had no other option. I would have gone on farther if I could have, but it was already like it had already been a very long day. I camped under the Burlington Skyway, covered about 80 kilometers from the Burlington Skyway to the Toronto Islands. And when I got to Toronto Islands, it was like 10 p.m. and I left at like before 5 in the morning. So I was like, oh man, this is, if I don't camp here, I have no idea what I'm going to find in Scarborough and the points up ahead. So I took that spot when I got it.
So you've done some objectively very difficult trips. I mean, your above the trees journey. Yeah, I've been in enough of that country to know that that's really difficult traveling. What's your heuristic for is this safe to keep going? Like, where's your quitting point? Have you bailed on a trip? Certainly, I'm sure there's days where you plan to do something and you called it early. There's this motivational thing like, go, let nothing stop you. Pain is weakness leaving the body. But in the wilderness, if you push that too far, you're dead. So, what's your decision making process about whether you should continue on any given day and even whether you should continue any given journey?
Right. Well, I mean, I always sort of finish what I start. That's kind of my mantra. But my mantra is also no unforced errors, which I think is a tennis expression. I asked someone that the other day, and they also didn't really know tennis because I was like, well, I don't know what that expression comes from, but I use it in the wilderness. And that's just another way of saying, err on the side of caution. I don't want to make a mistake in a rapid if I can avoid it. So I'm actually quite cautious when it comes to the white water. I mean, I always joke that I'm not a risk taker. And I mean, it's inevitable when you've run hundreds of rapids that sometimes you'll be like, man, I was maybe too impatient and should have scouted this one out better or portage. And now here I am in the thick of things. But the vast majority of the times I try to do it the safe way. So I'll be like, okay, I could probably get through these rapids, but probably isn't good enough. I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to edge down the side. And many times you can edge down the side of a northern river, just sort of around the banks and avoid the big water out in the center. Just sort of, skirt down the side there. And I'll sometimes like jab my paddle. I'll bring a wood paddle and I'll have a carbon fiber lighter one, but I'll bring my wood paddle just to slow the canoe down. And if I can't do that because there's a ledge or there's a waterfall, or there's just something dangerous along the side, I'll get out and try to line the canoe with a rope. And if even that's not possible, then I'll ultimately resort to portaging. But I'll always do that. And, I get emails, as I'm sure you probably do, from people saying, I want to come on an expedition with you, or Instagram messages or what have you. And on a rare occasion, I've taken people up on it. One of my closest friends is a guy named Chuck Brill, and he emailed me, and I said, "Okay, I'll take you in the wilderness. You sound like a good guy, someone who his mindset matches my own." And he was 30 years older than me, and he'd been a Boy Scout leader for many years when his kids were growing up. And I said, that's the kind of responsible mindset in the wilderness I value. And I get emails from the other end of the spectrum from people who are like, big adrenaline junkies. And I always say, people make me nervous. Like, that's the kind of person I don't want to be in the wild with, because you're going to push the envelope and want to run some crazy rapids or go out when the waves are like, huge white caps and gale force winds, when I want to stay on shore and let the storm die down. And I don't want to be anywhere near you in the wild, because that's where bad things happen. So I always try to, if Mother Nature says you're not traveling, I say Mother Nature makes the schedule. That's what I always say. So when I just alluded to canoeing from before 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., but I did that because it was an incredible day. It was dead calm. The lake was smooth as glass. And even though it's the Great Lakes, they're home to millions of people, they can be more dangerous than just about any body of water. I mean, the storms on them are terrifying. And I always was trying to avoid, getting trapped in big swells or something when I was going around breakwalls on the Great Lakes. But yeah, I just try to be patient. So if the waves are big, then I just say, how do I make the most of this delay? Is there things that need repair among my gear, holes in the tent that I can patch up with duct tape so the black flies don't get in? And I get caught up in writing in my journal, right? I'm writing my book in the wilderness most of the time, so I'm getting caught up on my writing. Is there wet clothing? Almost invariably, that I can string up and dry out. Purify some water. Boil lots of pots of water and purify it, so I've got my water supply back up. A lot of times I drink the water untreated out of necessity, but certainly, again, if I have the opportunity to purify it, then I will purify as much of it as I can. And I'll do other things. I'll be like, I haven't slept much because I've been putting in such long days. Now's a good chance to get caught up on my sleep. If I have a solar panel, can I recharge my GoPro so that it will actually work the next time a bear comes? All these kinds of things. So I try to make the most of a delay. I say that, there's kind of a silver lining in any scenario out in the wilderness. So if the winds are bad, I'll just say, okay, well, now this is a chance to explore on foot. Maybe I can do more. Look on the tundra, find some wild berries to eat, find some wild mushrooms to roast over my fire, do all kinds of things. So yeah, my sort of mantra is actually to be cautious. Slow and steady wins the race. It's like the tortoise and the hare. Push on, yes, but it's like slow and steady rather than a crazy adrenaline-fueled drive, right? I will push on. Oftentimes I'll say, when in doubt, push on, but that's actually just more of a slow routine where I'm just paddling. I'm not doing anything, heart-stopping or really dramatic. I'm just putting in long days, and it's like, meh, this spot doesn't look that good to stop at. There's no level ground. There's wild rose bushes everywhere. I don't really want to sleep on a thorn, so I might as well go on for another hour, and I'll have a better sleep anyways if I do that. So I'll push on in that sense, but not in the sense of like, there's huge gale force winds, let's just go anyways. No, I wouldn't do that.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the thing you focused on. You talked a little bit about rapids, but you've mostly focused about the wind and the waves and the whitecaps. And when I spoke with Cliff Jacobson years ago, who's one of my favorite outdoor how-to authors, he's very clear that the big danger is big lakes.
Right.
And certainly if you look at it statistically, the number of people who get eaten by a bear in North America a year is something like 5 or less. Whereas thousands of people drown in lakes every year. Now, a lot of them are drunk. We have to add that disclaimer in, that a lot of people who are out on a lake are drinking, and that when people who are drunk are out in deep water, some of them are going to drown. But even so, there's the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald happened on a big body of water. It didn't happen in a rapid.
No, and I get asked that question all the time. What's like your scariest moment in the wilderness? And everyone always wants me to tell bear story. And I'm like, I've had lots of scary moments with bears. I've had 2 grizzly bears charge me. I had a polar bear come at me in my canoe. I've had bears come to my tent at night in the dark. But I always say, like, my 10 scariest moments, if I was being really honest and just sat down with a notepad and wrote out everything and ranked them, I would say my top 10 doesn't have a single wildlife encounter on the top 10. It's all storms. Like when it's like, huge winds, that's terrifying even inside a house. You think sometimes my house is going to get ripped away here. Geez, how I live in an old farmhouse. Is this thing going to hold up? But when you're in a tent and there's like high winds, it feels like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Like you're literally going to get lifted up. On the Arctic tundra, you're so exposed. And when there's lightning and you're counting the seconds in between the flash of lightning and the thunder, and it's like, oh my goodness, I barely got a second. I barely got one Mississippi in there. That is terrifying as well, right? And just huge waves. I try to be as cautious as I can, But it's inevitable on a long journey where you're going for thousands of kilometers. Sometimes you just get caught, right? Where it's like, oh shoot. In Labrador, when I was crossing Labrador, it was like every day. I started to think like 40-kilometer gusts is a good day because it's just so windy there, right? It'd be like weeks of just high winds. So I'd have to, as much as I didn't want to, just say, okay, this is as good as it gets, I guess. I'm just going to have to try to get across this lake. And there were terrifying moments where the wind would be howling and there'd be huge white caps and I'd be far from land, just trying to, focus for dear life on keeping this canoe upright and riding with these waves to get next to the shore and then like basically kissing the ground and being like, I'm not going to do that ever again. And then eat a granola bar and like an hour later you're back out there. But um, yeah, definitely. To me, I would agree with Cliff Jacobson. The most terrifying thing are storms, high winds, big waves, large bodies of water. That to me is almost all the incidents I remember. Like with my friend Travis in 2014 when we were canoeing across Victoria Island, which is an Arctic island in Nunavut. There was just one bad lake there. I remember how uncomfortable I was in those waves as we were canoeing along. Or once even on James Bay, where I was battling big waves at the mouth of the Harricana River because I had to cross it. Just those are the ones that stay with me, where I'm like, oh man, that was terrifying. I had my life jacket on, of course. I have merino wool. Sometimes they even have neoprene. But it's like, I know if I fall in this water, it's going to be really unpleasant, to say the least, to try to
If
swim.
you survive.
And yeah, it's going to be brutal, right? Even with a life jacket on, you're going to lose feeling pretty quickly in your extremities, and I'm just going to have to try to swim with everything I have to give to get to that mainland. And then when I get there, probably gonna have to do like jumping jacks and push-ups just to get enough warmth to actually be able to feel my fingers to make a fire. And I have to try to recover as much of my gear as possible. So I'm usually thinking ahead of time, like mentally preparing myself if this canoe swamps or capsizes. Which of my things here do I want to kind of grab? And it's always the barrel because it floats and it's got a lot of the vitals inside of it, right? And I'm like, okay, with that, everything else I can lose, but if I hold on to that, I'll be okay. It's got like the most important stuff, fire starters and this sort of stuff. My pot's in there so I can boil water. I think I have extra clothes, so I should be okay if I just grab this one. And I don't. That's another good question. As canoeists, we can talk about because I love your videos when you get in, you wade into these really big hot topics, controversies. What's better, a gun or a bear spray? Spray skirt, no spray skirt. These are all things that are fun to discuss. But another one that is one of these eternal debates among wilderness canoeists is whether or not you should tie your gear down into the canoe or leave it loose. And I know like Bill Mason and Cliff Jacobson, all the big names in the history of wilderness canoeing have had differing opinions on that and discussed it. I'm curious what yours are. I know what my opinion is on that, but
Do we have enough time? I
oh
would
my
love
goodness,
to.
yeah, I gotta pick my kid up from school.
You you got to run, but
Right.
I'd love to have you back for a part two, and we could just go over
The
the
big
big
debates.
debates. Gun versus bear spray. That's a good
Yes.
one.
Right.
Uh, Spray decks for sure. I think we have different opinions on there.
Right.
Bench
Well, it
shaft.
depends though. I think we're very nuanced. We both agree that there's so many specific circumstances. It depends what you're doing, right?
This is no age of nuance, Adam. I'm right and you're wrong, and
I
and you
have a
can come
spray
in.
deck and I use
Huh?
it. I used it on the coast of Labrador. But I don't want to use it on like, when I'm traveling up a river because then you have to stand up, right, in the canoe and pole, right? So it depends.
Okay. Well, when your book launch dies down a little bit, we'll have a part two, and we'll just do the great canoeing debates.
Oh no, I don't want to have a big debate, especially with you. Discussion. Friendly,
Big
nuanced
discussion.
discussion.
No, we have to pose it as this. It's like a fake rap war between two rappers.
Right,
So
right. Yeah,
Kesting versus Shoalts, and
right.
we'll have a create a thumbnail of us with like our river knives out or something. It'll be great. I promise.
All right, but what are we going to disagree on? I guess we probably see the
Oh, we'll
sides.
find something.
We
I don't
see
know.
eye to eye, maybe spray skirts a little bit,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't think we disagree that much on that. Do you tie down or do you not tie down? I need to know.
I'm sorry.
Do you tie down or do you not tie down gear in the canoe? I need to know.
It depends if I'm doing a series of short lakes and lots of portages. I don't tie down. But if I am going for a longer distance on a lake, especially, and in whitewater, I tie everything down because it's kind of like flotation, like in my little whitewater boat, my little what a 9 foot long esquif ledge. It's got airbags in it. So the my argument is we will have this argument on part two.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Uh,
yeah, I guess it's
all right.
different with a canoe that small. Yeah. Yeah.
Farewell, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show.